Pablo Picasso, the artist who reinvented the 20th century. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing and liking the video. It truly helps the channel grow. Pablo Picasso's life begins in a room lit by oil lamps and the smell of the sea. It is the night of October 25th, 1881, in Málaga, a port city in southern Spain. Outside, waves roll against the harbor walls and horses clatter over cobblestones. Inside a modest apartment above a tobacco factory, a baby boy fights for his first breath. The midwife fears he is stillborn, but an uncle, a doctor, blows cigar smoke toward the infant's face. The baby coughs, cries, and the room exhales in relief. His parents name him Pablo Diego, Jose Francisco de Paula Juan Nepomuceno Maria de los Remedios Cipriano de la Santísima Trinidad Ruiz Picasso. The world will know him simply as Pablo Picasso. Picasso was born into a family where art is not a luxury, but a job. His father, Jose Ruiz Blasco, is a painter and drawing teacher who paints pigeons, landscapes, and church decorations. His mother, Maria Picasso Lopez, keeps the household steady. From the time he can hold a pencil, Pablo draws. Family stories say that his very first word is piz, short for lapis, the Spanish word for pencil. Whether or not that detail is perfectly true, it reflects a larger truth. Drawing will be his native language. As a little boy, he sits beside his father's easel, watching the brush move across canvas. Soon he begins to copy what he sees: birds, hands, faces. His father notices that Pablo's lines are not like other children's lines. They are confident and sure. When the family moves, first to Coruña in the north of Spain, then later to Barcelona, Jose keeps finding work as an art teacher, and Picasso keeps filling sketchbooks. At school, he is restless and easily bored, but in the art classroom, he becomes focused, almost fierce. He seems able to see a subject once and then hold it in his mind like a photograph. By his early teens, Picasso's technical skill is already astonishing. At 14, he passes the entrance exam to the prestigious La Lacha School of Fine Arts in Barcelona in just a single day, a test that usually takes older students weeks. His father, recognizing his son's superior talent, is said to hand over his own brushes, admitting that the boy has surpassed him. Picasso's early paintings, like First Communion and Science and Charity, show that he can already paint in the polished, classical style expected by the academies: realistic faces, careful lighting, serious themes. But the world around him is changing, and so is his mind. Barcelona at the turn of the century is alive with cafes, anarchist politics, and radical art. At a smoky cafe called Els Cottergats, Picasso meets writers, poets, and bohemian friends. They talk late into the night about modern life, about Paris, and about breaking away from the old rules. Picasso draws caricatures for the cafe, experiments with styles, and signs his work simply Picasso, dropping his father's surname. At 19, he makes his first trip to Paris, the heart of the art world. The year is 1900. The city dazzles him. He sees paintings by Toulouse-Lautrec, Degas, and Van Gogh. He walks through the poor neighborhoods of Montmartre, where artists, dancers, and workers crowd into cheap rooms. He returns to Spain but cannot forget the energy of Paris. Within a year, he is back, determined to make his name there. The Paris he moves into is not glamorous in the usual sense. He and his friends live in the Batoliver, a rickety building in Montmartre that serves as a cluster of studios. It is cold in winter, often without running water, and the artists sometimes burn their own drawings for heat. But it is also a place of intense creativity. Picasso paints, sketches, and absorbs everything he sees: circus performers, beggars, lovers in cheap cafes, the shape of the city itself. Out of this period comes what is now called his Blue Period. Between about 1901 and 1904, his paintings are dominated by blue and blue-green tones, with only occasional warm colors. The subjects are often lonely: blind men, thin mothers and children, prisoners, and street people. A close friend of his, the poet Carlos Casagemas, has died by suicide, and Picasso carries that grief into his work. In paintings like The Old Guitarist, the figures are elongated, their bodies bent and tired. The mood is somber and compassionate, as if the artist is wrapping the poor and the sorrowful in a shawl of color. After a few years, another shift begins. Picasso es paletoime. He begins painting circus performers, harlequins, and acrobats. This is the Rose period, around 1904 to 1906. The figures are still thin and thoughtful, but the colors turn to pinks, ochres, and soft reds. Picasso is now living with Fernande Olivier, his first long-term partner, and they share a studio life filled with both struggle and affection. He is selling a bit more work, gaining patrons, and feeling at least slightly more secure. But Picasso is never satisfied just to repeat himself. Each style, once mastered, becomes a platform to jump from. In 1906, he visits the village of Gosol in the Spanish Pyrenees. The harsh landscape and simple life there, combined with his exposure to Iberian sculpture and African masks back in Paris, begin to push his thinking in a radical direction. He starts to distort faces and bodies, flattening them, simplifying them into bold shapes. The revolutionary work that crystallizes this change is painted in 1907, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. The painting shows five women in a brothel, but it is not a traditional scene. Their bodies are angular, their faces are sharp and mask-like. Space itself seems splintered. Some faces are inspired by African masks and Iberian carvings. Picasso works on the painting in secret, showing it only to a few close friends. When they finally see it, many are shocked. Even artists who are used to bold experiments are unsettled by its violence and fragmentation. The painting is not immediately exhibited, but it marks a turning point. In it, the seeds of Cubism are planted. Over the next several years, Picasso, often in close dialogue with the French painter Georges Braque, develops Cubism. Together, they push toward a new way of seeing. Instead of representing objects from a single viewpoint, they break them into planes and facets, showing multiple angles at once. A guitar, a bottle, a human face, all become forms that can be sliced, rearranged, and reassembled on the canvas. This analytic cubism uses muted browns, grays, and greens, focusing on structure rather than color. The paintings can be challenging to read, like visual puzzles, but they are full of quiet energy. In 1912, Picasso and Braque introduce another step, collage. Picasso begins gluing pieces of newspaper, wallpaper, and printed labels onto his canvases, combining painted forms with real-world materials. In works like Still Life with chair caning, a patch of oilcloth printed with a chair cane pattern stands in for a seat, and a rope forms the frame of the picture. This move brings bits of everyday life into the artwork and blurs the boundary between illusion and reality. It is a simple idea with enormous consequences for modern art. As Cubism spreads, other artists adopt and adapt it, but Picasso keeps changing. He is not interested in being trapped by any one style, even a style he helped invent. Around the time of World War I, his work shifts again. He begins to draw and paint in a more classical manner, with solid sculptural figures inspired in part by ancient Greek and Roman art. Paintings like Three Women at the Spring show sturdy, monumental bodies. At the same time, he continues to produce Cubist works. It is as if two or three different Picassos are working side by side. The war years bring personal changes as well. In 1917, he travels to Rome to work on costumes and sets for a ballet by Sergei Diaghilev's Ballets Russes. There he meets Olga Koklova, a Ukrainian dancer. They marry in 1918. Picasso enters a more bourgeois period of his life. The couple has a son, Paolo. His paintings include graceful portraits of Olga and of stylish women in elegant clothes. He moves in fashionable circles, though he remains wary of being absorbed into mere society life. Yet harmony does not last. Picasso's relationships are often intense and complicated, and over time he and Olga grow apart. He becomes involved with a young woman named Marie-Therese Walter, whom he meets in 1927. She is much younger than he is, and their relationship will remain secret for years. In his art, her presence appears as soft, rounded forms, luminous and sensual. She becomes a major muse of the 1930s, recognizable in numerous paintings even when her identity is not publicly known. In the late 1920s and 1930s, Picasso's work also takes on some of the distorted, dreamlike qualities associated with surrealism. Although he never becomes an official member of the surrealist group, he shares their interest in the unconscious mind and in breaking apart normal logic. Figures twist, double, and melt. At times, the imagery becomes almost nightmarish. Bodies split open, heads seen from multiple directions at once, eyes staring in several directions. These forms, however strange, carry emotional weight. Tenderness, desire, fear, and anger all mixed together. The calm of artistic exploration is shattered by politics. In 1936, the Spanish Civil War begins. Picasso, who has been living mostly in France, watches his homeland tear itself apart as General Francisco Franco's forces battle the elected Republican government. One event in particular shocks the world. On April 26, 1937, the small Basque town of Guernica is bombed from the air by German and Italian planes supporting Franco. The attack destroys much of the town and kills or injures many civilians. Picasso was asked to create a mural for the Spanish pavilion at the 1937 World's Fair in Paris. At first, he struggles to find a subject. After Guernica, everything changes. He begins working furiously on a large canvas that will become simply known as Guernica. The painting is huge, over 25 feet wide. Painted in stark black, white, and gray, it shows a tangle of screaming figures, a woman howling over her dead child, a horse pierced by a spear, a dismembered soldier, a bull, a woman leaning out of a burning building. Light bulbs and lamps cast harsh beams. There is no single central hero, no comforting resolution. It is a cry of pain in paint. Guernica is unveiled in Paris and becomes an international symbol of anti-war protest. It travels to many countries, raising funds for Spanish refugees. Picasso states that as long as Franco remains in power, the painting will not return to Spain. True to his word, it remains abroad for decades, first in Europe and then for safekeeping during and after World War II, at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. When World War II begins, Picasso remains in Paris, even after the Nazi occupation. His art is labeled degenerate by the German regime, and he cannot exhibit publicly. Yet he continues to work in his studio, making paintings, drawings, and sculptures. German officers visit him, curious to see the famous artist, but he keeps his distance. One story describes an officer pointing at a photo of Guernica and asking, "Did you do this?" Picasso allegedly replies, "No, you did." Whether or not the exchange happened exactly that way, it captures his stance. He uses his art as a quiet form of resistance. After the war, Picasso joins the French Communist Party. He attends peace conferences, signs petitions, and makes posters with doves as symbols of peace. Some critics see this political engagement as naive or one-sided, especially as news of repression in the Soviet Union becomes clearer. But for Picasso, it is part of his desire to stand with the oppressed. He remains a member of the party for the rest of his life, even while living as a wealthy and famous artist. In his personal life, the post-war years are also turbulent. His marriage to Olga had long since broken down, though they remained legally married until her death. His relationship with Marie-Therese continues in complicated ways, especially after she gives birth to their daughter, Maya, in 1935. In 1943, Picasso begins a new relationship with a painter and photographer Dora Maar, who documents the making of Guernica and appears in many of his paintings, often with a weeping, fractured face. Later, he forms a partnership with Françoise Gillet, a young painter with whom he has two children, Claude and Paloma. Gillet eventually leaves him and later writes a frank memoir about their life together. In the 1960s, he lives with Jacqueline Roque, who becomes his second wife and remains with him until his death. These relationships leave deep marks on his art and on the lives of the women and children involved. Picasso is both a source of inspiration and a figure of great emotional difficulty. Creatively, however, he does not slow down. In his later decades, he moves between the south of France and his various studios, working in bursts of extraordinary productivity. He takes up ceramics in the late 1940s at the Maduro workshop in Vallauris, experimenting with plates, vases, and tiles. He engraves and paints on the clay, turning ordinary objects into playful, inventive works of art. He also creates large metal sculptures, assembles found objects into new forms, and continues to draw constantly. In the 1950s and 1960s, he begins a series of variations on the works of earlier masters Velázquez' Las Meninas, Manet's Luncheon on the Grass, and others. He does not copy these paintings in a traditional way. Instead, he breaks them apart and reimagines them through his own visual language, cubist distortions, bold colors, and exaggerated forms. It is as if he is having a conversation across centuries with the painters he admires, arguing and playing with them on canvas. By now, Picasso is internationally famous. Museums hold retrospectives of his work. Critics debate his every move. For some, he is the embodiment of the modern artist. For others, his constant experimentation is confusing or unsettling. Yet even people who know little about art can recognize his name. Children draw in a Picasso style without ever having seen the original works. His signature itself becomes iconic. In his final years, Picasso retreats more into his private world of work. He lives in homes in the south of France, surrounded by studios filled with canvases, sketches, and sculptures. He wakes early, paints, eats, and paints again. Visitors describe rooms stacked with paintings, some rolled, some leaning against walls, many never shown publicly. He continues to explore new themes: musketeers, couples, artists, and models, himself as an old man looking back at life. The lines become freer, the colors bold and sometimes harsh. Some critics in the 1950s and early 1960s dismissed these late works as chaotic or crude, but later generations will come to see them as powerful, honest, and full of energy, a final sprint by a man who never stopped moving. On April 8, 1973, at his home in Mugens in the south of France, Pablo Picasso dies of heart failure at the age of 91. He leaves behind a vast estate of artworks, paintings, drawings, prints, sculptures, ceramics, along with notebooks, letters, and the tangled legacy of his family relationships. Legal disputes over his estate will continue for years, as will debates about his character. But there is little argument about his importance in the history of art. What makes Picasso's story so compelling is not just that he lived a long time, or that he made many works. It is the way he kept reinventing himself and, along the way, helped reinvent what art could be. From the sorrowful figures of the Blue Period to the fractured plains of Cubism, from the fierce protest of Guernica to the playful ceramics and late paintings, he treated each new problem as a chance to see differently. He did not believe that art should simply reproduce what the eye sees. Instead, he believed it should show how the mind feels and understands. He once said, "It took me 4 years to paint like Raphael, but a lifetime to paint like a child." The line does not mean he rejected skill. In fact, his early realist paintings prove his technical mastery. Rather, he wanted to recover the directness, honesty, and freedom of children's drawings, combined with the knowledge and discipline of an adult. That balance, between control and spontaneity, between tradition and experiment, defines his work. Today, Picasso's images are everywhere, in textbooks, on museum walls, on posters, in memes. It is easy to forget how shocking many of them once were. When Les Demoiselles d'Avignon was first painted, some viewers thought it was ugly, even monstrous. When Cubism emerged, critics joked about broken mirrors and smashed furniture. Yet the world eventually caught up. Modern design, architecture, photography, and even digital imagery all owe something to the idea that reality can be fragmented and recomposed, that a single object can be shown from many angles at once. If you stand in front of a Picasso painting in a quiet gallery, you can feel the force of his lifelong urgency. The shapes are bold, but behind them lies a lifetime of observation. The pigeons in Malaga, the dancers in Paris, the faces of lovers and friends, the grief of war, the aging of his own hands. His biography is not a gentle story. It is filled with hardship, contradiction, brilliance, and harm. But as a documentary of one human being's creative drive, it is unmatched. In the end, Picasso's story is also the story of the 20th century itself. He lived through the fall of old monarchies, two world wars, the rise of mass media, and the spread of modern cities. His work mirrors this turbulence. Early paintings show an older Europe still tied to classical ideals. Cubism breaks those ideals apart just as new ideas in science and politics are breaking old certainties. Guernica freezes the terror of mechanized warfare. The late canvases, with their raw lines and blazing colors, seem to anticipate the noise and speed of contemporary life. For viewers today, Picasso offers both inspiration and a challenge. He shows that creativity is not a straight road but a series of experiments, failures, and sudden leaps. He reminds us that mastery is not an endpoint but a tool, something to be used and then risked again. His personal flaws, his harshness toward those close to him, his sometimes blinkered politics, do not cancel his achievements, but they prevent us from turning him into a simple hero. Instead, he remains what he always was, a complex, brilliant, deeply human figure whose work invites us to look harder and think more honestly about ourselves. When we trace his life, from the baby coughing at cigar smoke in Malaga to the old man painting furiously in the south of France, we see not a straight climb to fame but a restless spiral. Each twist adds another layer. Child prodigy, bohemian outsider, co-inventor of Cubism, political witness, wealthy celebrity, aging experimenter. Through all these identities runs a single, unbroken urge: to keep making images, to keep asking what a line, a color, a shape can do. That urge is the real subject of any documentary about Pablo Picasso. And it is the current that still runs through his paintings whenever someone stands before them and feels the shock of seeing the world made new.